On this vlog, upgrading the front brakes to accept 10-inch wheels. So I started on the right front of the car. I soaked the two caliper bolts, which are 9/16, with some WD-40 to help with their removal, and the breaker bar did a great job at releasing the two bolts. So I tried removing the caliper straight away, but it was very difficult and I couldn't do that. So then I removed the pads by first of all removing the two retaining pins or cotter pins, taking off the retaining clip, and with the pads out it was then easy to remove the brake caliper. So here I learned a valuable lesson, and that is it's easier to undo the brake line with the caliper still attached to the rotor rather than trying to undo it by hand. Undo the brake hose with it on. To remove the caliper the rest of the way, I simply unscrewed. Now another lesson, following on from the last, is be prepared. So as you can see, I wasted some time while brake fluid was leaking out of the pipe. So the lesson is to have the new caliper ready to then, once the old is removed, simply reapply. Then when the new caliper is on, I hung up the caliper with a bungee cord to avoid strain on the brake line. Next task is to remove the cotter pin from the hub nut, which is much harder than you would think it is. So the biggest task here with this job is obviously the removal of the hub nut, because it's at a very high torque setting. Tried the breaker bar, that did not help. However, I do have an impact wrench, and when I used the impact wrench, it worked, and it worked very easily and very well. That worked, but like a charm. So as you can see, I raised and lowered the car quite a few times now, and most times putting the 4 bolts in the wheels. Hindsight being a wonderful thing, probably could have got away with just applying 2 bolts. Once I pulled the wheel off and the hub nut was off, it's actually very easy then to remove the rotor with the taper washer falling out, as you can see. Need a taper washer? Next, I gave everything a thorough cleaning using a wire brush and some blue roll. And you can see here I've made a decision, temporarily at least, to leave the brake shield on. The new rotor from Mini Spares will come lightly greased to avoid going rusty in transit, and so I also gave that a good clean as well. Now I did notice when I put the new rotor on the hub that it was very tight and it appeared to be binding with the dust shield. However, I still assembled it and torqued it to the right spec just to give it a test to see whether on final assembly and torquing that would fix the problem. So I got it to that torque. I decided to remove the dust shield, very easy, 1 Phillips screw and a square bolt, and then reapplied the new rotor assembly. Did experiment a few times with different methods to tighten the hub nut. and as you can see, once I tightened it here, the hub and the rotor moved much more freely with no binding at all. So the only thing left to do, once I'd learned the lesson of only using 2 bolts, was to lower the car again. Was to tighten the hub nut to the correct torque. That torque being between 235 and 276 Newton meters. So with the car raised up again, using the impact wrench, I tightened a little bit further just to align the cotter pinhole or the split pinhole with the nut and the shaft.
There you go.
The retaining pin required a little bit of persuasion to get back into its hole. It was in very good condition, and of course once it was assembled, gave everything a good clean and reattached the brake caliper. The nuts on the caliper, again 9/16, they're torqued down to 40 Newton meters. Once the caliper is applied with the right torque on the caliper bolts, it was a simple case of inserting the pads and the pins, a little bit of copper grease on the rear of the pads, continuing to check that everything was rotating smoothly with no binding, put the wheel back on, and job done for the front right. That brings this task and this video to a close. Very much enjoyed it. Took me about 9 hours, could have done it in less. Next task will be to put the new wheels on when they arrive. Till next time.